Ever get that feeling, that keeping your business finances totally on track is like trying to navigate a maze, blindfolded, and hoping you don't just walk into a wall?
Yeah, I think many can relate, especially today. Having really efficient, up-to-the-minute financial ops isn't just nice anymore, is it? It's foundational for any strategic move.
Absolutely. And for organizations making that move to cloud ERP, like SAP S/4HANA Public Cloud Finance, well, there's this core thing called SAP Best Practices.
Mm-hmm. They get mentioned a lot, but sometimes their real power, how they actually streamline things in finance, kind of gets lost in all the tech talk.
Exactly. So that's what this deep dive is all about. We're zeroing in on those best practices, specifically in that S/4HANA Public Cloud Finance context.
Right.
Think of it as like your guide to understanding how to get this system running and how to set yourself up for success without drowning in acronyms.
Our goal is pretty straightforward, really. We want to make these SAP best practices totally clear for you, because they're not just ideas, are they?
No, definitely not.
They're pre-built, industry-tested ways of doing things embedded right there in the software. It's like having a ready-made blueprint for efficient, transparent finance. That's what we're digging into.
And to get a really solid handle on this, we've looked at materials straight from SAP. The stuff outlining their recommended practices just for finance in the S/4HANA public cloud.
Yep. So the mission for this session: pull out the really crucial bits about these finance best practices. We want to show you why they're so fundamental in the cloud, and crucially, how they benefit you if you're adopting S/4HANA public cloud.
Okay, so let's kick things off. What exactly are SAP best practices? Beyond the name, I mean.
Well, they're definitely more than just a set of guidelines. Think of it as decades of SAP experience all bundled together.
We're learning from tons of businesses, all shapes and sizes, right?
Exactly. All industries. The official definition is pretty good, actually. It calls them a curated collection of pre-configured integrated business processes, along with the methodologies, the content, the guidance. Basically everything you need to use the software effectively. It's like SAP saying, look, we've seen what works best, here it is.
And the key words there seem to be pre-configured and integrated. This isn't just theory.
Not at all. These are actual things you activate in the system. Tangible assets. It's like getting a proven recipe, using the combined know-how of the whole SAP world.
Okay, so it's not just one big monolithic thing. How are they structured?
Good question. They break down into components. The first key thing to grasp is scope items.
Scope items.
Right.
Break that down for us. What are they, simply put?
Think of them as the fundamental building blocks, individual units you can activate. Each one is a specific business process or capability that's been digitized.
Okay, like an example.
Sure. So you might have J58. That specific scope item deals with accounting and financial close.
Got it.
Or maybe 1EG, which is for bank integration, using, the traditional file interface method.
Oh.
And the useful part is the flexibility. You pick and choose. You activate the scope items that match your business needs. It's not like all or nothing.
That's good to know. You don't have to take the whole package if you don't need it.
Yeah.
What else comes with these best practices?
The other really vital piece is the documentation assets. SAP gives you a ton of information for each scope item.
Okay.
And the main place you find all this now is the SAP Signavio Process Navigator. That's your central library, basically.
Right, says Navigator. Got it. So what kind of stuff is in this library?
It's pretty comprehensive. You get SOAP item fact sheets. They give you the business level view, the benefits, the key steps, easy to understand.
Okay.
Then you've got process flows, visual diagrams. They show you exactly how the standard process is supposed to run.
Wow, visuals are always helpful.
Yeah, and interestingly, you can often download them in BPMN2 format. Handy if you need to do more detailed process modeling yourself.
Right. What else?
You also get detailed test scripts. Step-by-step instructions, really useful for validating the process works in your system, and for training people too.
Essential stuff.
Definitely. Then there are setup instructions. They guide you through any prerequisites, especially for integrations. And, where needed, configuration guides that get into the more technical weeds of the system settings.
Wow, okay. That's a lot of detail. Sounds like they really want to make it as clear as possible.
They do.
And this isn't just finance, is it? You said it covers other areas too.
Oh, absolutely. It's broad. Finance is huge, obviously, but you've got best practices for HR, supply chain, manufacturing, sales, service, R&D, asset management.
The whole shebang.
Pretty much. And it goes beyond the core operations, too. There are best practices for embedded analytics, pre-built reports, dashboards, for the user experience using SAP Fiori, for data migration, which is always a big one.
Always.
and integration scenarios connecting to other SAP cloud stuff like Ariba or SuccessFactors. Even just setting up the system initially is guided by best practices.
Okay, that gives us a really good picture of what they are. So let's talk why. Why should a business actually adopt these? What are the real tangible advantages?
Yeah, the crucial question. And the benefits are pretty significant. First up, speed and efficiency.
Makes sense.
Because so much is pre-configured based on proven ways of working, you can seriously speed up your implementation.
Get live faster.
Exactly. And that means smoother operations sooner, faster time to value. You see the benefits much quicker than a traditional, heavily customized project. We're talking months, maybe even years faster in some cases.
Faster time to value is always a big selling point. What else?
Secondly, cost savings. Big one.
Always is.
By using these ready-made processes, you cut down massively on custom development. That directly lowers your implementation bill. Plus, the standardization helps lower your day-to-day running costs. It all adds up to a lower total cost of ownership, or TCO.
Lower implementation cost, lower running cost.
Yeah, that's compelling.
What about avoiding project headings? Does it help there?
It definitely does. That's risk reduction. You're using processes that are tried and tested across loads of companies. So you're reducing the risk compared to building everything bespoke from the ground up. Fewer errors, more stable system.
Like a built-in safety net. Yeah, I get that.
Precisely. And then there's standardization, having consistent processes across the board.
Which helps with?
Well, it simplifies compliance, for one, makes training easier, streamlines management overall, just makes things, well, more standard.
Consistency, easier compliance.
Yeah.
Especially important in regulated industries, I imagine.
Hugely. And because these are high quality processes, drawing on all that SAP experience, you also get quality and predictability. Meaning you're using best-in-class methods, things that deliver reliable results. You know what you're getting, more or less.
So not just faster, but better and more consistent too.
Exactly. And looking ahead, adopting best practices gives you a solid foundation for innovation and agility. Because your core is standard and understood, it's much easier to plug in new SAP innovations as they come along. Plus, a clean standard core lets you be more agile when you do need to extend or adapt for specific needs later on.
Right, so you're not bogged down by years of custom tweaks when something new comes out.
That's the idea. And finally, maintenance. System maintenance, upgrades, they become much simpler, less disruptive, because you're sticking closer to the standard.
Okay, putting it all together, it really feels like using SAP best practices isn't just a suggestion for S4 on a public cloud. It's, well, essential.
It really is. And that leads perfectly into why they are so utterly foundational in this specific public cloud world.
Yeah, let's unpack that, the S4 on a public cloud aspect.
This is where it gets particularly interesting. The shift to cloud ERP, especially multi-tenant SaaS like S4HANA Public Cloud, it changes the whole game.
How so?
In these environments, standardization isn't just nice, it's critical. Think about it, lots of customers sharing the same underlying tech, getting updates simultaneously.
Right, if everyone had totally different custom systems, updates would be chaos, a nightmare to manage.
Precisely. Unlike old school on-premise, where customization was king, the public cloud thrives on uniformity. Too much individual tinkering just breaks the model, makes updates impossible, ruins the cost benefits.
Okay.
SAP best practices provide that essential standard framework, the common rules of the road, if you like, that let the public cloud model actually work efficiently.
So they're the fundamental operating principles for this public cloud ERP world.
That's a great way to put it. And crucially, it's not optional. In S4HANA Public Cloud, using these best practices via scope items is mandatory. It's part of the standard package.
Mandatory. Wow. Okay, that underscores it. So choosing S4HANA Public Cloud isn't just a tech choice.
Yeah.
It's a strategic decision to align your core operations with SAP's standard processes.
Exactly. And that mandatory adoption is what enables the whole evergreen concept.
The continuous updates.
Right. Because the base processes are standard, SAP can develop, test, and roll out updates and new features efficiently across all public cloud customers without breaking things left and right. Everyone's working from a similar foundation.
That makes total sense. Evergreen is a key cloud promise. And you mentioned pre-configuration again. How does that fit?
Well, these S4HANA public cloud systems often come provisioned with a bunch of best practice scope items already activated, sometimes called a starter system.
Oh, okay.
It's a ready-to-run approach. It massively cuts down initial implementation times compared to starting with a blank canvas like in the old days.
Yeah.
You can start validating and seeing value much faster.
Hitting the ground running. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned aligning processes with SAP standards. This sounds like the fit to standard philosophy I keep hearing about.
Yes, exactly. Because best practices are mandatory, fit to standard becomes the core implementation philosophy for S4HANA Public Cloud. And it's a big shift.
How good.
It means embracing the idea. Adopt, don't adapt the software. So instead of starting by mapping out your current processes and then bending the SAP software to match them the old fit gap way,
Right.
fit to standard flips it. You start by understanding and adopting the standard SAP best practice first, wherever possible.
So the default is use the standard.
Yes. Then the analysis focuses on finding the real Delta requirements, the critical gaps where the standard process genuinely doesn't meet an essential, non-negotiable need.
Like a unique regulatory thing, maybe,
Right.
or something that gives you a real competitive edge.
Exactly, those kinds of things. You focus your effort there, not just on recreating old ways of working just because.
Right. Avoid paving the cow paths, as they say.
Precisely. And this discipline, prioritizing the standard, is what helps you get and keep a clean core.
Clean core. Another buzzword. What does that mean practically?
It means keeping your central ERP system as close to standard SAP as possible. Avoid messing with the delivered code directly.
And the benefits of that are?
Substantial. Easier upgrades, like we said. Faster adoption of new SAP innovations, regulatory updates, less technical debt, that tangled custom code that gets harder and harder to maintain.
Technical debt. The silent killer.
It can be. So a clean core generally means lower TCO, a more agile system overall.
Okay, so if you do have a real gap, something the standard doesn't cover, what's the clean core way to handle it?
The recommendation is to build extensions or custom apps on separate platforms like the SAP Business Technology Platform BTP.
Okay.
These extensions then talk to your standard S4HANA core, integrate with it, but they don't change the core code itself.
Like apps on your phone, working with the OS, but not changing the OS.
Perfect analogy. It keeps the core clean, upgradable, but still lets you innovate and meet unique needs flexibly.
Got it. So these mandatory best practices in public cloud really force a different approach to implementation, a big change management exercise.
Absolutely. You need buy-in to shift from heavy customization to adopting standards. But the flip side is it makes advanced capabilities more accessible.
How so?
Things like, say, sophisticated group reporting or complex integrations or embedded analytics. Building those from scratch used to be hugely complex and expensive.
Right.
Now they often come prepackaged as best practice scope items. It can really accelerate your digital transformation.
Okay, so we get what best practices are, why they're so vital, especially in the public cloud. Now, how do you actually use them during an implementation? This is where SAP Activate and Fit to Standard really come in, yeah.
Exactly right. SAP Activate is the roadmap, the methodology from SAP. Think of it as the GPS for your S4HANA project.
Okay.
And it has 3 pillars. SAP best practices themselves, guided configuration tools to help set things up, and the Activate methodology, the step-by-step process.
And that methodology has phases, right?
Yep, 6 phases: discover, prepare, explore, realize, deploy, and run. It's generally sequential, but with agile elements built in. But for today, the explore phase is key. That's where Fit to Standard workshops happen.
Explore phase.
Okay.
What's the main goal there?
It's all about validating the standard SAP best practices against your business needs and identifying any real gaps.
How does that work in practice?
Typically, consultants demo the relevant standard processes, the scope items, using that pre-configured starter system we mentioned.
Using the flowcharts and test scripts.
Exactly. Showing how the standard process is designed to work out of the box.
And then your own business experts weigh in.
Absolutely critical. They review the demos, compare it to their needs. The main aim is to adopt the standard as much as possible.
Okay.
Any place where it really doesn't fit a critical need, those Delta requirements get documented carefully, usually in a backlog tool like SAP Cloud ALM. And they also gather configuration details needed for the standard processes during these workshops.
So it's very interactive. Sounds like a big focus on understanding the standard first.
Huge focus. It requires a mindset shift, like we said, for everyone involved.
How so?
Instead of consultants asking, how do you do it now, and just documenting custom stuff,
Right.
the conversation becomes, here's the SAP standard. How well does this work for you? Where are the absolutely essential gaps we must address differently?
And the business experts need to justify deviations.
Exactly. Based on real value or necessity, not just, well, we've always done it this way. You need to really understand the standard to make those calls.
Makes sense. It's about informed choices on where to deviate. Now, guided configuration, how did that help?
Guided configuration refers to the tools that make setting up the system easier based on those best practices you decided on.
Like?
Well, in public cloud, SAP Central Business Configuration CBC is key. That's where you define your scope, activate the scope items.
Okay.
You also have things like business-driven configuration questionnaires, BDCQs, structured ways to get config details from the business during Explore, and sometimes self-service configuration UIs, SSC UIs, where business users can even make some config settings themselves.
So tools designed to smooth the setup based on fit-to-standard decisions.
That's the idea. And the Activate methodology itself provides tons of accelerators in the roadmap viewer online.
Accelerators like?
The best practice documentation itself flows, scripts, guides, but also project templates, how-to guides, links to training, invaluable stuff to speed things up and keep it consistent.
Okay, so Explore is about understanding and validating. Guided config and accelerators help set it up. What's next?
That leads to the realize phase. This is where you actually build and test the solution.
Based on what came out of Explore.
Exactly. You activate the chosen scope items in your dev system using CBC. You do the detailed configuration for the standard processes. You build any necessary integrations or extensions, ideally on BTP, remember the clean core.
Right, BTP extensions.
You migrate your data.
Yeah.
And then you test thoroughly. Test everything end to end.
So it's a structured flow, leveraging best practices all the way from understanding to building and testing.
Okay, let's zoom in on finance now. How do these best practices really help in that specific area? Finance is obviously critical, and the best practices there aim for standard, efficient, compliant processes. They really lean into S4HANA's real-time capabilities, the simpler data model, the in-memory speed.
Can you give us some real examples? Finance scope items in action. What do they actually do?
Oh, sure. Loads of them. Covering core accounting, closing, treasury. Let's take record to report. R2R first. That's your basic accounting close stuff.
Okay.
You've got the foundation. J58, accounting and financial close. That's your standard process for month-end, year-end closing. Getting those financial statements out accurately and on time.
The fundamentals.
Right. Then you have specifics like 1GA accounting and financial close group ledger IFRS and 2VA for US GAAP.
Handling different accounting standards.
Exactly. They build on J58 but add ledger-specific postings, closing steps needed for IFRS or US GAAP. Shows how compliance gets embedded.
Very useful for international companies. What else in R2R?
Well, there's 1GB Asset Accounting Group Ledger IFRS for managing fixed assets under IFRS, 1GF for assets under construction tracking costs while things are being built. Okay. 1GI General Ledger Allocation Cycle for automatically spreading costs or revenues around, essential for cost management. Even Petty Cash has 1GO Cash Journal.
Even petty cash.
Yeah. And of course, the core transaction stuff. J60 accounts payable for supplier invoices. J59 accounts receivable for customer invoices. There are R2R, but obviously link into procure to pay and order to cash cycles.
Naturally.
Oh, and 33Q actual costing for detailed inventory evaluation is another one that you might want to watch how that evolves in S4HANA.
Okay, so really comprehensive coverage of core accounting. What about, say, Treasury?
Yep, Treasury and risk management is covered too. You've got 1EG bank integration with file interface. That's the traditional file exchange method.
Okay.
But then you also have 16R bank integration with SAP multi-bank connectivity or MBC. That's the modern API-based way. More real-time communication with banks.
So options depending on your needs and tech.
Exactly. Shows how best practices evolve. And there's also 1HB financial plan data upload from file getting your budget data in easily.
Okay, so with all these specific finance best practices, what's the net benefit for the finance team day to day?
The benefits add up. Big automation of routine tasks, depreciation, payment runs, intercompany stuff, frees up the team for analysis.
For strategic work.
Right. Better consistency and compliance, standard processes everywhere, accounting rules built in, real-time insights thanks to S4HANA Speed and the embedded analytics, the Fiori apps, and just overall efficiency, faster close, less manual work, fewer errors.
Sounds like it really can shift finance from just transaction processing to being a more strategic partner. And you said these base practices aren't static.
Crucial point, yeah. Especially in the public cloud. SAP updates them regularly. New features, new regulations, process improvements based on feedback.
So you need to keep track.
You do. Tools like the RASV tool release assessment and scope dependency help you see how upcoming changes might affect the scope you've activated.
Good to know. So it's an evolving standard you're tapping into.
Yeah.
Now, for someone wanting to find these and use them, where do they start? How do you navigate and activate them?
The main place to explore the content is the SAP Signavio Process Navigator. It replaced the old Best Practices Explorer.
Okay, Process Navigator. Online tool.
Yeah, web-based. You usually need an SAP user ID, like an S user, to get in. It's the portal to everything best practices.
And once you're in, what can you do?
You can search and browse, filter by solution, S4 OnDisplay Cloud Public Edition in this case, filter by industry, by line of business like finance, by country, even by scope item ID if you know it.
Find what you need.
Exactly. And when you find a scope item, you get all that documentation. We talked about fact sheets, process flows, test scripts, setup instructions, config details. It's your main resource during discover and explore phases.
So Process Navigator is where you learn about them. How do you actually turn them on in the system? Activate them.
Activation is mainly handled via SAP Central Business Configuration, or CBC.
CBC again? Okay.
That's the cloud tool where you define your project scope based on your initial assessment and those fit-to-standard workshops. In CBC, you define your org structure, set key parameters, and then you confirm which scope items you want to activate. Hitting certain milestones or confirming scope in CBC usually triggers the automated activation in your dev system.
More streamlined than the old on-premise ways?
Generally, yes. Much more efficient. And then those changes get transported through your landscape, dev, test, prod for testing, and go live.
And who actually pushes the button in CBC?
Usually it's the implementation partner consultants doing the technical activation in CBC, but it's all based on the strategic decisions made during fit to standard about which processes to adopt.
Okay. What if you go live and then realize, oops, we need another scope item? Can you add them later?
Generally, yes. It's best to scope thoroughly upfront, of course, but you can usually activate more standard scope items after go live.
Maybe not as simple.
It might involve change management procedures, maybe different activation steps depending on the phase and complexity. Might need to go back to CBC, or maybe even request activation via SAP. But the key is, activating scope reflects those core business decisions from fit to standard. It's not just a tech step.
Okay, so wrapping things up, it seems clear SAP best practices are the absolute bedrock for S4HANA Public Cloud, especially for finance.
Absolutely. The advantages for efficiency, compliance, innovation, they're huge and real. And that fit the standard approach, guided by SAP Activate, is the essential framework to unlock that value.
And it really demands that cloud mindset shift, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Adopt the standard, use the tools, extend smartly only when needed, keep that cord clean.
That's the winning formula, which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener.
Go on.
Really consider how embracing these standardized yet constantly evolving finance operations through SAP best practices could fundamentally change your organization's agility, its competitiveness. What new doors could it open for analysis, for strategy, for better decision making as you move forward in this digital world?